Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with Dan Gordon. I want to read his bio real quickly. Dan is a screenwriter, producer, director, and a reserve captain in the Israeli Defense Forces, the head writer for the TV show Highway to Heaven, which I used to watch when I was a kid, right? Michael Landon. And then you went on to write numerous screenplays, including Passenger 57 with Wesley Snipes, Wyatt Earp, starring Kevin Costner, Murder in the First, starring Christian Slater and Kevin Bacon, Let There Be Light, starring Kevin Sorbo, which we know my good friend Dan Roebuck was also in, The Assignment, starring Donald Sutherland, Sir Ben Kingsley, The Hurricane, Denzel Washington was up for an Oscar nomination. But today we're here to discuss one of your latest films, which we spoke off camera, Irena's Vow, which I watched yesterday. And I want to give away a lot about the film, but I know it's not right. So we're just going to talk as much as we can without giving away too much about the film. But I thank you so much for this opportunity, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, I would love to talk about the whole film, but let's not give away too much. But tell me a little bit about first what inspired you to really to write the book, the play about Irene Gut, and just tell us what inspired you and why should people even want to go see the film? Like, why is it so relevant in today's history and society?
Right. Um, Somewhere around 1995, I was driving home from a meeting. I lived in LA at that time, and there was a program called Religion on the Line with this Dennis Prager, who used to host it. And usually you would have clergymen on, but this evening he had Irene Gut Opdyke, and she was telling her story, and I pulled into my drive, and I was so engrossed in the story she was telling that I sat in the driveway for the next 3 hours listening to her story. And the next day I called up the radio station, excuse me, and I said, look, my name is Dan Gordon and I'm a screenwriter. I'm not a psycho and I'm not a stalker. I've got credits, you can look me up. um, could you please pass my phone number on to Mrs. Updike and tell her that I'm interested in acquiring her life story rights to do a motion picture? And they said, okay. And then about 3 hours later, I get a phone call with this delightfully Polish accented voice that said, hello, Honia, this is Irene. And that started the love affair with Irene and myself. She became like a second mother to me. She was near the end of her life, but she really became like a second mother to me. And the thing that was so inspiring about her, Irene was a 19, 20-year-old Polish Catholic girl studying to be a nurse, good family, beautiful girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, when World War II broke out. And she was stationed on the Eastern Front, and that was the time when the Germans invaded from the West and the Russians invaded from the East. And her position was overrun. She was gang raped by Russian soldiers. She was beaten, left for dead. Took her almost a year to recover. Finally, the Russians let her return to the German zone. She went looking for her family. And the Nazis took many Poles, she was one of them, to be impressed laborers, forced laborers. And she wound up working for a German major, the highest ranking officer in this town called Tarnopol. During that time, she had seen a roundup of Jews that the Nazis carried out, that the Gestapo carried out. And she saw a Gestapo officer take a baby out of a woman's arms
Mhm.
and stomp it to death and then shoot the mother. But first he wanted the mother to live long enough to see the baby be killed. That was the cruelty of it. And then shot the mother. And she could do nothing. And she said, if I had spoken out, if I tried to interfere, I would have been killed. And she made a vow then and there to God. And she had a very pure faith, not dogmatic, but a very personal relationship with God. She made a vow, which is where the title comes from, that if it ever came into her hands to save a life, she would do it. So she's working as a waitress in the officers' mess. And part of her duties involved supervising the Jews who worked in the laundry, 11 people who became her friends. She spoke fluent German. She overheard the head of the Gestapo say that they were going to liquidate the ghetto. They were going to kill every Jew in Tarnopol. So she told her friends, you have to find a place to hide. And they said, Irene, you're such a baby, which she was. She was 19, 20
Mhm.
years old. They said, if we had a place to hide, we'd be hiding there. You hide us. And she said, well, where am I going to hide you? In my pockets? I mean, I don't, she literally, her room was a converted broom closet that had a cot in it. She said, I can't hide you. They said, well, in that case, we're dead. She goes back to the officers' mess. The major was waiting for her. The major said, pack your things, you're finished here. And she thought somehow he found out that she warned the Jews. She started to stutter and stammer, like, I've been a good worker and everything, because she knew she could be in trouble.
Mhm.
And he said, look, I don't need any dialogue about this. I said, you're finished here. That's it. I've commandeered a villa at the edge of town. I'm not going to live in bachelor officers' quarters any longer. I'm going to be entertaining a great deal. You're going to be my housekeeper. I'm going to give you a squad of soldiers, clean the villa from top to bottom, have it ready for me to move in 10 days, because in 2 weeks I'm giving my first party for the Gestapo. So without hesitating, she went back to the Jews and she said, I found the perfect place to hide you where no one will ever think of looking, in the house, in the basement of the highest ranking German officer in Tarnopol, which, when you think of it, is
Mhm.
absolutely insane. But her faith in God was so pure that she thought God would see them through. And she hid. Later, they took in one more Jew. So it became 12 Jews hidden in the basement of a German major without his knowledge for over 8 months. There
Wow.
were 3 married couples in the basement. Eventually, they found that there was actually a secret hiding place in that basement. And they walled off a place that was called the honeymoon suite. And a baby was actually conceived in that basement. Um, so it's an extraordinary story of not just heroism, but someone whose moral compass is so perfect, is so
Mm.
correct, and someone whose faith um, is just absolutely perfect. She had you know, she simply believed God would not let any harm come to them. Now, she was also really smart. She could also improvise solutions. She also had a great sense of humor, and this isn't to take away from any of the heroism that she had and the skill she had in dealing with the situation. But at the center of it really is her faith.
Mm. No, you're right. When I was watching it, I had to pause and reflect a few times because she had those opportunities, like you said, even though the consequences, she would have been, she would have been killed on the spot. But I had to think about it because relationship versus religion, in the sense that I could, quote scripture all day, sitting home, sitting on my couch. But when there's a gun to my head and someone is like towards the end of the film where they find out, and she has that opportunity to sort of come clean and beg for her own life, and she's willing to die. Like, you see how powerful her faith is. So it made me reflect on my own faith to say, what would I do in that situation? Because it's easy to say as I'm sitting in my house in New Jersey, but in a situation like that, and there was so much heroism, and then the way, like you said, she adapted on the fly. She was so convincing. And to think, who would ever hide 11, 12, 13 Jews in the basement of the highest ranking official and officer? It was a brilliant film. And you said something earlier, and as I was watching it, there's two scenes where you mentioned one where the baby's killed. And it was hard for me to watch. And I was wondering, I mean, I know it took place obviously in her story, it was part of her story and her vow, but was it difficult for you, or even just the other crew, or the producers, to add that into the film? Because it was challenging for me to watch, even though we know the just the terrible acts of from the SS and the Nazis. But how, for you personally, was it hard for you to add that into the film?
It wasn't hard for me to add it into the film. It's very difficult today for me to see it because the same things and worse
Hmm.
happened on October 7th. So prior to this, everything my, you know, knowledge of a relation to the Holocaust comes from books, comes from documentary footage, comes from having known many Holocaust survivors, but I never saw it. I never felt it in my bones. Um, October 7th, Hamas did
Hmm.
nothing less than what the Nazis did. They came in and killed children in front of their parents, killed parents in front of their children, beheaded babies in their bed, burned them alive, burned parents and children tied together alive. And anybody who says that's not true, I have the footage. They have the stomach for it. I have the footage. And I have the footage because they were proud of what they did.
Exactly.
The Nazis at least tried to hide their atrocities. Hamas gleefully posted theirs on Facebook. So today, all of those scenes, which were academic in a sense to me, are incredibly difficult to watch because it's like, no, this isn't a story. I know the people that it happened to. I know the children who are dead. I know the people who were, dear friend of mine lost 5 family members right there that day. Boom, parents, 3 children, all dead, gone, and not gone quickly or easily or prettily.
Mm.
So yeah, that is today. It's hard to watch.
Yeah, the second one too was hard for me to watch too. And I was at an event NRB recently where they had a lot of the footage, and it was really difficult to watch. I mean, we watched a lot of footage, so I know what you're referring to. And
Yeah,
that
I mean,
second scene,
I just got back from Israel about 8 weeks ago, and I did a 7-part documentary for TBN, which will start airing in May. One of the specials that already aired, and I was there for 6 weeks, and I was at the scenes of the massacre. I embedded with Israeli troops. I was in Gaza. Um, there's demonic stuff at work there. That's the only way I know how to describe it.
wow. And that scene too, where the SS is sort of explaining to the major, I think it is, right? Where he's explaining how you take over, how you control someone and the steps. And I started to think about the Roman Empire and the Greeks, and perhaps it was adapted from that way of thinking. And then even talking to my son, he's only 8, but when I try to explain to them, just Hitler, right? And the vision that, the Aryan race and how that was portrayed, and how I say to him, I said to him yesterday, I said, Mario, we would have been killed as Catholics, as we don't fit that mold. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and perfect nose. We don't fit that. I wasn't born as a leader. So, I mean, there are people out there that not that they're not familiar, but maybe not familiar with the atrocities of World War II, especially Hitler killing over 6 million Jews and countless, Poles and Catholics and Christians. But tell me from your experience and the research you've done, what led Hitler? What was Hitler's mindset, perspective on, you know, thinking that he was, the god, in the sense of trying to create this superior race? Like, what was his motivation? What was he inspired by?
I mean, honestly, I've pondered it and pondered it, and to me, um, if you ever wanted proof that the devil exists, look at the rise of Nazism and of Hitler in particular, and the rise of Hamas and ISIS. Um, and there can't be a devil without a God. So anybody who needs proof of God just has to look at the unreasoning, insane evil that is unleashed. Um, there to the anyone who thinks that culture is an insulation against evil just has to look at what happened with Germany. There were no more cultured people on the face of the earth than the Germans. This is the land of Bach, of Beethoven, of Mozart, of the greatest philosophers. I mean, this was the center of culture. It didn't insulate them against evil at all. At all. It was co-opted. And that, the absent God, we basically can do whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
There is no innate, I don't believe, moral compass absent of belief in the divine. People can be put off by saying, oh, it's ugly, I don't want to see it. But given the chance to do anything, people will do anything unless they believe there is a God and that there is a moral code, and this is what God wants of us. Like I say, I think if you want proof that the devil exists, look at his works.
Yeah. There was a documentary, you probably saw it. It was Steven Spielberg did, and it was about the concentration camps in Poland. And they had like five family members or five friends, and how, and it's like in the movie, it started off very slowly. They couldn't enter the park, then they couldn't enter the park with the dog, and the dog wasn't allowed. And slowly but surely, they were completely controlled, and then most of them died. And they had footage inside the concentration camp. I don't know if it was Auschwitz. I'm not sure if it was that one. And they showed how they would stack the bodies and how many people died, and then some of them survived. And to watch that and to see what Hitler did, the how demonic he was, to see that, really, I mean, it's
I'll,
just it's
I'll,
terrible.
I'll give you a statistic, and it didn't really, the magnitude of it didn't hit me until I realized what the statistic was. Between 1940 and 1945, the Nazis killed 1.5 Jewish children in those 4.5 years. If you take all the wars of the United States, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the wars, Korea, that America has ever fought over a 400-year period, Hitler killed more Jewish children in 4 years than America lost soldiers in 400 years.
Wow.
It was industrial murder. And I gave a line to Rokita, to the Gestapo officer, where he's admiring of it. He says, it's just good German engineering.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So when you were researching and you had this relationship with Irena, what did, like, how did your faith change? What were you like? It had, obviously it impacted you, but what changed in your life, spiritually, personally, after hearing her story?
I've always, I've never not had, and I've been blessed in that sense. I've never not had faith in God. I've never not had a relationship with God in my life. So on the one hand, it affirmed my faith. My son of blessed memory, my oldest boy, my firstborn, Zachy, was killed in a car accident when he was 22, 6 months after he graduated first in his class from NYU Tisch School of the Arts, with a brilliant future ahead of him. And a lot of people tried to say a lot of things that to comfort one, and there is nothing you can say. I learned that a long time ago, to someone who's lost a child. But Irene was one of the first ones to come. And she just hugged me, and she looked at me pretty square in the eyes, and she said, there is tragedy in life, Juanya. And I thought, wow, that's the wisest thing anybody has said so far. It's part of the deal. There is tragedy in life. There is. And one's faith is what one leans on during those times. It's what guides you when you don't know which way to go. It's what guides you in those moments that you're talking about, when the gun's to your head. And what attracted me to Irene's story was I met someone with a perfect moral compass. A perfect moral compass. I've met one person like that in my life, and that was Irene.
Wow. Amazing. So obviously there's no coincidences in life, right? This film is coming out at a time where I think we needed more now than ever.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. I mean, I've seen that even with the Cabrini film and Sound of Freedom, like the way these films come out, and the way the enemy tries to hold back films like this, and the obstacles, the adversity that comes along with trying to do a film that glorifies the goodness, right? God, I mean, faith. And this film is really, it's inspiring. And like I said, I've watched a lot of World War II films. I mean, all of them. And I would say honestly, this is there. This is at the top, because it wasn't just a war film, right? It was something that really made me think about my own life. Like, the chances of me being in a war is slim to none, but being in a situation like that where my faith is tested for someone else. Even though I say it, I love God, I have faith in Jesus Christ, and I'd lay down my life and I'd carry the cross. But that line in that film is so powerful. Just look down. And I thought about that and I said, we're called to look up, to look at the cross, to carry the cross, not to look down at his feet only, is to look. So the question is, how heavy does the cross need to be for me to put it down or to deny it? And that question is what I was left with, is that, yes, I can look down and save my own life, or I can carry the cross and look ahead, and whatever happens, whatever consequences, come along with that, I know I'll be in heaven with Jesus Christ.
I will tell you that in the 28 years that I've been now involved with this story, and 28 years since I wrote the line that Schultz gives, where he says, you know how you survive this. And he was a good man. He said, you know how you survive this change of circumstance, you look down, you look at your own 2 feet, taking 1 step at a head at a time. That's the normal thing. You're the only person I've ever met who got why that line was there, because Irene looked up. That you're the only person who's ever gotten that. It's very rewarding for me to hear this, because that was the counterpoint that I wanted to put. And I didn't want to be preachy about it. But the humanist view is look down, take care of yourself, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Just take care of yourself here. That's the smart thing to do. That's the smart money. The person of faith looks up. And that's the hard choice. But that's the moral compass.
Well, thank you. I'm glad. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's
really
true.
Do. So where can people watch this film, find out more about it? Can you let us know?
Yeah, the film will be in theaters April 15th and 16th, be in about 1,000 theaters across the country. I urge them to see it. If they missed the movie, or if they want to actually know more about the story, I also wrote the book, Irena's Vow, which you just go on Amazon and Google Irena's Vow by Dan Gordon. You'll come to the book. There's only so much you can do in a 2-hour movie, so a book gives you more room to do stuff. But I urge them to see the movie and read the book. Her story is so important. And again, something you said resonates with me, is there are 2 things at work, like, as you said, the enemy does try and get in the way of stuff. It took me 28 years to get this movie made. But then you think and say, well, maybe that was God's plan all along, because this is when it was needed the most. It wasn't needed that much 28 years ago. Right now is when it's needed.
Exactly. I agree. And you wouldn't have been able to reach as many people back then. And you know the name of my company? God's Plan Productions. So
there you go. There you go.
Dan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I do advise people to see the film. What a powerful film, and really and reflect on some of the things we spoke about, because it's important. It really is important to stop and think about what would I do in that situation, because we're all called to carry the cross. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize your words and actions. God bless you.